The largest contributor is still credit cards at this point in time because, and it stands to reason, right? Credit cards are one of the simplest financial products. They're simple to understand. They're also very simple to kind of, attach rewards to as well.
Before we get into the rest of the podcast, a quick shout out to our sponsors. Thank you, XVC Tech. They're an emerging technology VC based just down the road in Dubai.
Hello and welcome to the latest edition of our podcast. It's a pleasure to have our special guest zooming in from Singapore today. Nawaz, hello.
Hey, Ronit, how are you?
Very good, very good. MoneyHero Group, Southeast Asia's largest consumer finance marketplace operator.
That's right.
I almost got there. And so over the next 40 minutes or so, Nawaz and I are going to dive into what MoneyHero Group does and zoom out and talk about the Southeast Asian consumer. Is that a thing? Who is she? What is he? What does that mean for Fintech? What does that mean for MoneyHero? And also talk a little bit about Nawaz's journey into being part of this entrepreneurial fintech tech world, having spent many years, like me, in London, working for a very large global bank. So Nawaz, welcome again. Welcome again. So let's start with the market, Southeast Asia. So what does the Southeast Asia consumer look like? Is that even a thing?
Ronit, it's not a thing. It's many things, right? All rolled up into one. We've both got history in emerging markets to some extent, right? In one way, shape, or form.
Hopefully a future as well.
Yeah, history and the future. Of course, you can't have a future without history, though. But Southeast Asia isn't just one tagline at the end of the day. These are very, very different separate countries, each with their own core drivers. And from a consumer's point of view, consumers are quite different, right, from one to another. Let's take some examples. Singapore, very, very wealthy place, as a lot of people know. Extremely digitally savvy across all dimensions. As a consumer here, you basically have access to everything, right, on your digital fingertips. Everything is very well developed. You can get access to a lot of information. You have access to a lot of products as well, including consumer finance products. And then you kind of juxtapose that with, more of a kind of an emerging Southeast Asian market, like the Philippines, for example, since I was talking about it before. And there, things are still getting going. Digital penetration is not as high, but is growing rapidly. People are they're getting much more digitally savvy. I mean, the younger generation are just as digitally savvy as everybody else. But things are still picking up the pace, right? At the end of the day, the cultural nuances are different as well from one market to another.
Totally. Should we start with Singapore? But before we get into Singapore, it's probably worth giving a shout out to our sponsors because Singapore is where they came from. They're based in Dubai now. The XDC founders who are behind and supporters of the XVC investment company that backs this podcast, always one of the supporters of this podcast. So they came from Singapore. Originally from India, but built it in Singapore. And let's talk about Singapore as a market. I mean, you've been there a few years now. The company you're working for, you're part of the leadership team is based in Singapore. Just get into Singapore. I mean, it's a big market for you, right? So talk about the Singapore consumer and what does fintech look like in Singapore?
Yeah, look, Singapore is a big market for us. As a whole, of course, the total number of people in Singapore is not as great as some other countries, just on the face of it. But that really doesn't give the true picture, right? At the end of the day, because the spending power per capita, for example, is very high in Singapore. Singapore is heavily financialized, so the typical Singaporean or even resident here in Singapore, has access to pretty much every single consumer finance product under the sun in many ways. Well, in terms of what's available and regulatory allowed, but the range is vast. to be frank. You've got all different shapes and sizes and colors of credit cards. You've got all the different, unsecured consumer lending options you would want. Highly developed secured lending market, mortgage market, right? Extremely highly developed investment market as well. You've got it's Singapore, for example, in Asia was at the forefront of robo-advisory evolution as well. So you have the new players coming up. I think we both know that the regulator here, the MAS, has been very forward-looking in so many different ways in terms of developing and expanding the ecosystem. And the list can go on and on. Singapore is also being used as a base for, certainly the regional headquarters of a lot of companies, but also there's a lot of startup activity and a lot of entrepreneurship activity that's going on here. Once again, facilitated by the government in one way, shape, or form, supported by various different entities, including the sovereign system, and just decent amount of capital, just in general, and decent amount of talent. So we, for example, MoneyHero Group is dual headquartered between Singapore and Hong Kong, but we have a lot of our, I would say, corporate functions and significant number of our leadership that are based here in Singapore as well. So covering the other markets essentially from Singapore. But Singapore, from a fintech point of view, there's everything going on, and I haven't even touched into the B2B side, sort of capital markets infrastructure and all that kind of stuff, right? And a lot of that is also prevalent here in Singapore.
When you say everything going on, compare Singapore to Hong Kong as a fintech market, or some of the other big cities in the region. Because the starting point of this conversation was, what's the Southeast Asian consumer, and how do you, as a fintech, service that Southeast Asian consumer? So if I compared Singapore to, I don't know, Hong Kong or the Greater Bay Area or Bangkok or Jakarta or Greater Jakarta, so the big cities in the region, obviously there are huge differences between country, but within probably as big a difference within country, in many ways bigger differences intra-country than if I compared capital cities or big cities. Put Singapore into that context. Does what you do in Singapore, can it be sort of ported across to these other big cities, or is it just very, very different?
A lot of things can be ported across, to be honest, and that's why a lot of companies can start here, for example, and develop a playbook in one way, shape, or form, and apply it to other markets, right? So, for example, I'll give you one very good example from a MoneyHero Group context. So we almost, we started our playbook here of essentially taking over the rewards operations of consumer banks, right? What that means is, so for example, if a consumer was to go to one of our platforms and get a credit card, you get a welcome offer, a reward, right? And that can be quite a high value reward, like an Apple Watch, something like that, based on their activation, ultimately.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So
pretty cool.
It is pretty cool, and it's a very interesting driver from a consumer's point of view as well. It is rewarding at the end of the day, and it's a positive thing. But so we developed the playbook of taking, essentially, taking ownership of the reward strategy, the reward sourcing, and the rewards fulfillment, and kind of developed that in Singapore and ported that across to the other markets that we operated in, right? In terms of how you do it, how you engage with financial services firms to do that, the underlying infrastructure for that, the data around that, and so forth and so on. And a little known fact, but guess who the largest Apple distributor in Singapore is? MoneyHero Group.
No way.
It is. Yeah.
You're the largest Apple distributor.
In the end, because of all these rewards that are given out to our users that end up signing up for these consumer finance
Not
products.
just Apple Watches, like Apple in general.
Yeah.
My gosh. Okay.
But yeah, it's really interesting. But to come back to your question, right, about portability, a lot of it can be portable, right, at the end of the day. Now, it also depends on your business model and what you're actually trying to create at the end of the day. If you're trying to create something, I would argue, super complex, perhaps in a different domain of fintech, then porting it clearly to another Southeast Asian market might not be that feasible, right? I don't know. I'm just talking off the top of my head, given my background as well in the past, but maybe trading infrastructure or something like that. There will be all sorts of nuances around that. But certainly, I think in the experience that we've had in building, the MoneyHero Group businesses, then it is portable. Now, the Singaporean consumer, I think, compared to some of the other more like developed Asian cities, like Hong Kong, is quite similar. So
Mm-hmm.
if we look at the kind of the key drivers of what's driving success for the MoneyHero Group businesses in both Singapore and Hong Kong, as an example, the drivers are fairly similar. And if anything, the MoneyHero Group business is more diversified a little bit in Hong Kong in terms of product lines,
Mm-hmm.
right? Compared to Singapore. So, for example, there's a nice spread of personal loans, there's a nice spread of credit cards, there's a nice spread of insurance in Hong Kong as well. That's also partly to do with the fact that the Hong Kong business for MoneyHero Group is a bit older than the Singapore one. Singapore was set up a bit later, but the core consumer drivers are quite similar, right? In terms of the ability for consumers, for example, to get financial products, to qualify for them, the credit underwriting, right? The way that credit scoring works and so forth and so on. It's all quite similar. Now, China with Great Bay Area would have its own nuances with Guangdong as well. So that's a little bit different, I would say. And having lived in Shenzhen before, I can testify to that.
Yeah.
Very fact. But
Yeah.
in general, I would say it's there are more similarities and differences between these more developed kind of cities.
Right. Maybe we could you moved to Singapore from Shenzhen, right? That was your last.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Maybe
right.
we could double click on that and just unpack that a bit more to sort of talk about again Singapore and some of these other cities vis-a-vis, say, a Shenzhen or Guangdong or some of the other Greater Bay Area cities. How does the consumer, and as a result, everything that goes around the consumer as a result, everything that goes to consumer finance or consumer fintech, how does it differ? Because one of the things I've always thought is, particularly sit in the West, and I'm sitting in the middle now, in the Middle East, but when we sit in the West, we tend to look at Asia and go, it's all Asia, all emerging markets. And these huge differences in business model and trend. And sometimes I think, Hong Kong is in some ways in finance more like London than
Right.
Zen across the 20
Yeah,
minutes across the border. Yeah.
exactly. No, I mean, look, when I was I can speak from my own personal experience
Yeah.
of having lived there, but obviously, the life was on Alipay or on WeChat, right? So
Yeah.
that's where everything was.
Which one did you live on? You lived on both, did you?
Well, I lived on both ecosystems for different reasons, right?
Yeah.
Alipay had more of an access to, I would say, certain financial products, like some of your wealth management products, for example. I don't know if things have changed because that was in 2020, just around the COVID times. But then WeChat was kind of more of your consumer elements. So, making payments, transfers. Alipay could do that, but just for one reason or another, I tended to use WeChat Pay ecosystem for that. But really, that for me was a striking difference when I came back to Singapore. So I lived in Singapore in 2013, 2014, like around that time. Then I had left. When I came back in the beginning of 2021, compared to Shenzhen, for example, you don't really have the concept of super apps here. Things are like Grab is trying to do it at the end of the day. But it's definitely not as prevalent. It's definitely not as integrated into life as it is in China, right? At the end of the day. But that's a striking piece.
The whole super app coming out
Yeah.
of whether it was WeChat or coming out of Ali, the whole super app experience. You said Grab's kind of done a little bit, just like here in Dubai, Cream sort of like
Right.
trying on top of the mobility, drop in food delivery and a wallet and payments and stuff, but
Yeah.
it's nothing like the original granddaddies of super apps, right?
Yeah.
Why is that? Because the question always is China, there's its own kind of Galapagos, right? Its own sort of ecosystem that, what happens in China stays in China. To mix up all my metaphors.
I'm not 100% sure that I would agree that it's because of what happens in China stays in China. The reason I say that is because, as you may remember, I lived in Beijing in 2011 as well. So that was a long time ago. And that was at the time when essentially WeChat, right, and Tencent were just kind of kicking off, I would say. It was nothing in those days. I mean, it was just tiny, right? And essentially what I saw is that literally, the Chinese style of doing it is that the pace of feature enhancement and the pace of progress and innovation is just so quick, right? And they just went all out at that. And so you actually had, I would say, a spread of different types of features and different types of value propositions for consumers that came through, right? And then you kind of couple that with the fact that inherently people were digitally native and were leapfrogging in terms of the digitalization right, in those days.
Right.
Those two factors were the primary confluence of why I think super apps dominated in China. Whereas if I look at, and this is kind of a little bit anecdotal as well, but if I look at, for example, Grab's trajectory, from in terms of trying to be a super app, like I remember using Grab when it first started. I think it was 2013, and Uber was still here, right, in those days as well. So before Uber exited the market by exiting to Grab, but I think the financial services element, right, of Grab, that came a lot later. Ultimately. Yeah, and now one can hypothesize about what the reasons are for that and so forth and so on, but literally, I think the Chinese way of doing it, based on my own experience, has been you just go and you build and you build and you build. You build really quickly and you kind of dominate, right, on that front as well. Yeah.
You build really quickly. So there is this kind of I want it now, I want it yesterday. And in fact, as I get bigger, I'm going to have 11 teams doing the same thing and then just whoever wins. Maybe not 11, maybe 3 teams, but and there's this kind of urgency and impatience. There's no 3-year or 10-year plan. It's almost the opposite of actually sometimes the old Western / Orientalist view of, this is 30-year plans in China. No, it's like, it's a 30-second plan. And it's like, move fast, pivot, move fast. And why can't that just happen elsewhere? Or is it just that leapfrogging phenomenon was just huge in China? Because when I said that throwaway comment, what happens in China stays in China, I guess I was referring to these very interesting / unique set of circumstances that came together in China. Some of that's there in Indonesia and India, but not quite, because China was a little bit ahead, right? So when the leapfrog happens, it happens very fast and very quickly. And it's not like in Indonesia and India, you could look at China and go, oh, they did that. Let's see if we can copy that. In China, it was like, well, like literally, the smartphone thing arrives in the late 2000s, and then there's a middle class that's emerged in the previous 10 years, and it just all kind of happens together. Plus these amazing Chinese entrepreneurs who there's
no logical way to say that like it happened in China, it can't happen elsewhere. There's no infrastructure, or there's nothing that I can point to that says there's like a substantive, tangible difference, right, between one country versus another. I think part of it it's probably a variety of different factors all coming together again, right? So China obviously raising capital in China in the past. I mean, for a long time, the capital was abundant. I mean, think about how much capital these companies raised, right? And then access to talent and access to people. There's so many people over there, really, working hard. That kind of philosophy, that kind of culture. I mean, 996 isn't just a phrase, right? I mean, it actually was the way things, or maybe still is, like the way things that really happened over there. It's not to say you can't have like a huge amount of progress, happening in any of these other countries, like including the ones that. Like including the one I live in and including the ones I travel to and all that. And, there's nothing saying that. I mean, even India, India has access to talent, right? It's got increasingly more capital flowing in. There are platforms that are starting to dominate. I mean, India did the whole, government financial infrastructure so well, in a way that no other country has. So, what does that say, for example, right? But yeah, I think historically, China probably just had a bit of everything. And a huge population that was willing to do all this stuff as well, all at the same time.
So the kind of ingredients that went into that kind of particular, dishes.
Oh yeah, absolutely. 100%, absolutely. And the pace of speed isn't just in the software world, right, or in the app world, or in the consumer world. You look at it in terms of everything, like even the hardware world. So.
No, it's amazing the pace of change in that country. Now, specifically, sort of. Zooming in on MoneyHero, to the audience who maybe don't know about MoneyHero, give us a little bit of the corporate history. Where do the founders come from? Where's the business first set up? I know this probably predates your involvement in the company, but let's pretend you were there.
Sure. Why not? Look, it's interesting. So the company in its current form actually came about because each individual country had its own consumer finance marketplace that was developed independently, but with a common shareholder. through that.
Oh, okay.
So that's how it first got going, and I think
How did
this
that
would have been.
evolve? Like, how was there a common shareholder in all these different marketplaces?
Yeah, I believe it was an entity called Nova Founders, which is I think was affiliated with Rocket Internet in some way, shape, or form
Oh,
back in the
okay.
day. So their playbook was just taking business models that worked in the West and trying to apply them in emerging markets, essentially. So I believe
Mm,
that's what happened. And then I think it was in 2015. There was a move to consolidate some of
mm,
the Southeast Asian markets under one umbrella,
right.
essentially, right? And then there was a large Series A, for example, or a large funding round that was done at that time. And I think the company got going in its current form around about that. Um, so yeah, it's always been consumer finance marketplaces. So they've always been channels that
Mm,
consumers can go to look at all
mm,
of their personal finance options, compare them, look at all the content, learn about them, look at all the rewards and offers, and then apply as well. The big difference came in the business model. I think it was around 2020 or thereabouts,
yeah.
where basically a B2B side of the business was set up called Creatory that was
Okay.
that was created to empower content creators across Southeast Asia to monetize. So imagine this: you have a blogger, right, in one of these markets that's writing about lifestyle and travel, and they happen to mention credit cards as part of that.
Well,
Now, wouldn't it be great for the user on their website, yeah, on their blog, to actually click
mm,
on that credit card link and apply for it as well? So what we did is we started that type of business essentially to empower these content creators, right? The long tail, as well as the platforms themselves, the channel partners, to essentially benefit from all the commercial deals that we had signed and all the offers that were available, right?
mm.
Across Asia with all the FS partners in place. So that was a substantive shift in the model. The other substantive shift that's been happening is just basically the focus on insurance rather than banking as well.
Mhm,
The banking is continuing, don't get me wrong, and it's a core part of the business.
mhm.
But insurance is a big area of focus into 2024 and beyond. There's a lot of appetite for digital distribution for insurance products, all sorts of general insurance products in particular.
You talked a little bit there about, I guess, what we call the creator economy, in a sense,
Mhm.
the independent creator economy. Talk a little bit more, unpack a little bit more about how Money Hero business
Yeah,
products fits into this kind of creator economy trend. Obviously, and getting back to what we were saying a couple of minutes ago about China, in a way, we've seen the creator economy in China in a completely different scale. And
yeah,
linked to that, that's had spin-off effects or spillover effects on how payments work and financial services work in a creator economy. So for the audience who maybe aren't based in Asia, who don't, I
yeah,
mean, some of our audience is, but
yes.
majority of our audience is based in the UK, US, UAE.
Sure.
It's a little bit more about what does the creator economy look like, and
Yeah.
how's that different to say back in the UK?
Yeah, it's good, really good question, actually. So one thing is for sure, I think that the creator economy, meaning people creating their own content
Hmm.
and trying to monetize it, is happening across all of the markets in Southeast Asia, as far as I can see. I mean, it's not
Right.
just Singapore, Hong Kong. It's there in Taiwan. It's there in Philippines. There in Malaysia. It's there everywhere,
Right.
essentially. So, from a Money Hero Group point of view, just to put it in context, so about 19% of our revenues at the moment comes from this flow of traffic that comes via these creators. So 19, which is
Oh,
quite
wow.
large, right? And
That's
in
a
some
big number,
markets,
right?
yeah,
Yeah.
it's a big number, and then it can be much larger in some markets, and you'd be surprised, like some of the more
So
emerging Asian markets.
what would the highest share be? In which market would that be, or which country?
Yeah, I think it tends to fluctuate, to be honest, depending on the season as well, the product
Okay.
line. But it's been the highest in different markets at different points in time, including in some of our emerging markets like the Philippines. But the whole
What are
ethos,
they doing? What are these creators
yeah.
doing? I mean,
So it ranges all the way from them writing blogs,
yeah.
right? Them writing blogs about all these topics under the sun, including lifestyle topics, all the way through to creating like videos, like
Yeah.
TikTok videos. And then, like I said, we also empower channel partners as well. So you can, for example, have an app, right,
Hmm.
that is not finance related at all, but they want to embed, for example, a link to a consumer finance product as part of the user journey. So like you might have like a food ordering app, for example, that you were alluding to. And at the end of that journey, once you've ordered your meal and you've got your final screen, right, saying what you've ordered, then you could have a link, like an ad basically for a credit card. Oh, by the way, use that credit card next time you order, and something like that, right?
Yeah.
But it's all of these, all sort of a whole spectrum of that. So yeah, people are people like to write and express themselves, right? And also they want to have the opportunity to have another income stream, right? Now, if you're writing about something that's a bit more niche, like for example, like travel or even like personal finance, right? You've got a lot of personal finance bloggers in Singapore, for example. Now, how would you monetize that is the question, because if you post a video on on YouTube, yeah, then how do you get distribution? Because that's a very generalized platform, right?
Yeah.
And you need to have another way of doing it. Are people going to pay a subscription, like Substack or something, to read for you, about what you're writing? I doubt it, because it's quite niche, right? And you need to have a really strong readership and audience for that. So what we realized is that ultimately people want to have the ability to make money off what they're writing. And because we're a niche player in this particular space, and we have access to those commercial agreements already, we can essentially do a revenue split for performance, right? So we can basically go to these content creators and say, look, really like what you're doing. You've got X number of people viewing your articles, X impressions. Let's test it out, and over time, let's make once we test it, we'll understand the conversion funnel that's coming from you, right? How many people are actually clicking on these links? How many people are actually getting these credit cards, right? And then over time, we'll work out a revenue split essentially with you, because the traffic's coming from you. It's still your, it is your user that's coming through. But if they buy a card from that, then you deserve to have some of the economics, right, over time. And for some of them, it's become a pretty meaningful revenue stream, honestly, like, and a sustainable revenue stream as well, over time. Yeah. Because if you think about it from a financial services perspective, what's the value proposition for them dealing with us as essentially as a middleman for this, right?
You kind of anticipated my next question.
Well, it's
why MoneyHero? Why do they use you? Yeah.
Because aggregate, the power of aggregating with one intermediary. Because otherwise, your X, Y, and Z consumer banking P&L owner, for example, has to put the infrastructure and the people in place to deal with all these other little affiliates, all one after another, right? And that's you can imagine the cost base and the headache. And banks are all about reducing cost income ratios, as we know, over time, rather than necessarily increasing them. So it is a case of dealing with one scaled player, right, to do customer acquisition. And this is another lever of customer acquisition in the end, right? At the end of the day. So yeah, it's basically from that point of view, ultimately. We can manage the whole thing.
Why has the creator economy become so big in Southeast Asia and in China? I mean, again, maybe it goes back to the earlier question about China fintech being so special or different 10 years ago. It just seems to be a different scale and relevance and importance than it is in, say, in Europe or the US.
Yeah. So I have my own particular views on this, and these are just my personal opinions. But I do think that to a large extent, in Asia, let's think about the history, right, of some of these places. You have had very varied groups of people that have come to live and that have percolated through Asia, right? You've had different parties essentially moving through and and all coming together and forming what is now the melting pot of Asia. But as a consequence of that, and also as a consequence of, for example, I would say the legacy of colonialism and all that kind of stuff, I think institutions obviously took longer to develop, right, in some cases. I think if you combine those two things together, people like relying on their own micro communities, right, for information. They like relying on micro communities for information. You can, I mean, this is 100% anecdotal, but I see the number of WhatsApp groups that some of my friends have here, for example, like on their phone, compared to the number of WhatsApp groups that like people living in London have. And honestly, it feels like here you've got maybe like 5 times more. You know what I mean? So it's basically the philosophy, I think, is that people like to get access to content and information from their own little micro communities, right? And that's why I think things like, for example, group buying, even live streaming to some extent, and live buying, right, on the e-commerce platforms. I know we're kind of changing tack a little bit, but that's why I think it's become quite popular, to be honest with you. And that's why I think creators here become quite popular, right? Because they can have their own channel basically for expressing their own view, but people will actually go and listen to them and and act essentially on what they're saying. So I think there's a socio-cultural element to it. Once again, purely my own opinion, but that's what I feel is kind of happening ultimately.
Now, broadening away from just the creator economy, obviously, as you said at the start of this program, you're the biggest consumer finance marketplace operator. I got it right this time, right?
Spot on.
10 million users, I think, last count, give or take. What are the typical products these users are using you for?
So the largest contributor is still credit cards at this point in time, because and it stands to reason, right? Credit cards are one of the simplest financial products. They're simple to understand. They're also very simple to kind of attach rewards to as well. It's a very proven kind of dynamic in there. They're also in this part of the world, they're kind of heavily associated with travel as well in order to get miles and stuff like that and points. So people are very used to going and applying for them. And there's a digital journey that's in place, right? If you go and apply for a card, you can complete the whole journey. You can get your qualification and all that done online as well. So credit cards are the most popular. But like I said, there are other consumer finance products as well that people do look for and apply for. Personal loans, insurance. Insurance for us is there's the fastest growing in terms of contribution, even though it's still smallest from a overall split of revenue point of view. But insurance is really popular. Products like travel insurance, for example, we actually host the entire journey on our platforms as well. So what that means is if somebody goes and looks for travel insurance, firstly, something you actually want to compare, right? Because it can differ from country to country and the number of people that are traveling, and there are all these different types of parameters in there, what's included, what's excluded, and so forth. But you can actually do the actual application and payment all in one place. So it's very seamless. The policy gets issued very quickly and all that kind of stuff. So those kind of products are really picking up pace as well. Across all of our markets, to be frank. But yeah, so it's kind of like your range of simple financial products at this point in time, I would say. But over time, what I would imagine would happen is you would kind of deepen, right, and have more and more complex products as well, kind of being embedded into that overall flow.
So that's a good segue to looking ahead. Let's get our crystal balls out and think about the next 3 to 5 years. I don't know if it's even possible to think 3-5 years out in parts of Asia, but let's think 3 to 5 years out and say, what does the business look like, MoneyHero, but also the kind of ecosystem around you? How is it changing? What are the biggest trends? Obviously, some of these are emergent already. Would they be very different, like in the Philippines to the Greater Bay Area to say Singapore? Just give us some thoughts. I obviously appreciate these are your personal views, and we're not going to hold you to it as a financial forecast. It's just spitballing. So what does that future look like?
Look, I think the future is one of ongoing. It's just one of ongoing development, right? In terms of the scope and scale of products that are available. Number one. Actually, for those people that are listening, if they're really interested in this, we actually Euromonitor did a study on the future of consumer finance for our markets. And that is available publicly on our investor relations website. So that looks out until 2028, actually. And it goes into all the key drivers per market. So that's actually good to read if you're interested in this topic and you want to go into a little bit more detail from a macro as well as digital trends point of view. But really, it's a case, number one, I think, of deepening the product ranges. I mean, in the Philippines, you can already see that happening, right? Like you have what used to be wallets, basically, now having, for example, like basic banking functionality built into them. They have trading functionality built into them, right, as well. Both in terms of like equity as well as crypto and stuff like that. So it's all coming together. So I think that deepening, right, the ease of access to these products is definitely a key thing. I think the one thing else, we're also watching out for is the actual active user engagement and how that happens as well. So, all of the digital platforms, trying to up their game, right, at the end of the day, in terms of engaging with users. Generative AI coming through, we're really watching that as well, to see if the modus operandi of how a user would engage with these platforms, the way they would use them, would systematically change. I mean, personally, I'm really excited to see what happens, no matter what happens, with all of that kind of stuff. So that's another element as well. But yeah, and I think just the overall kind of, we're obviously in a bit of a funding winter at the moment, for a lot of companies, right, particularly in the technology world. But at some point, things will change. So it'll be interesting to see what the next wave of kind of entrepreneurship also looks like, going forward, and the new types of products and solutions that end up being developed over here.
But maybe we could try to address that last point you mentioned by saying, imagine this was 10 years ago, like so 20, I think it's 2011 you said you were in Beijing. Imagine it's like 10 years ago, or we're all 10 years younger. So you're taking, or willing to take much more, let's say, just more out of the money risk. What would be the kind of out of the money options you'd be purchasing here? So if you had to do 2 or 3, is it kind of career decision, or is it personal investment? Knowing everything you know about what's happening in Southeast Asia and other parts of the world nearby, what would be, and I'm thinking fintech, but you can go beyond fintech, but let's focus more on fintech. What would be the 2 or 3, I think, it's not like 100% guaranteed. So as a result, a boomer like Ronit's not going to go and do it, but
Yeah, no, I mean, just on that, actually, one of the great things I think about the MoneyHero situation at the moment is that we just happen to be a large scale player in a fragmented market with a very solid balance sheet now after the capital raise post the IPO. So, that's a great position to be in, right? Both from a competitive point of view as well as for potential inorganic situations that can come through as well. But if I was buying call options, let's just say, very long dated, for the future, in the fintech world, then I would look at, I would look at things like, I would definitely look at things like the growth of wealth management, but with a digital angle. I think that's definitely like a structural megatrend, and I do think that across all the markets that I've seen in sort of Southeast Asia, that thing is not that well done right now. There aren't that many scale players, right, in that sort of space, and I think, honestly speaking, I do think consumers are crying out for that kind of good quality service over time. So I think that would be one area that I would personally look at. The other thing I would probably look at as well, from a fintech point of view, is, let's call it better. This isn't unique necessarily to Southeast Asia, but I would say things like capital markets infrastructure as well. I think it's just as applicable, honestly, over time, across Southeast Asia as it is in other markets. And that's kind of like a broad-based thing to say, but it's like all elements of capital markets infrastructure, I think, will obviously change over the next sort of 5 years or so. So I'll probably be looking into that if there's a way of doing it. And probably the last thing is around insurance, to be honest, because I mean, the regular sort of access to insurance policies, especially on the more complex end, is really complex, right? And it's kind of the user experience leaves a lot to be desired, in terms of the information quality that you have and the pricing as well, the sort of value exchange that you get on the back of that. I mean, I personally dread now, even it sounds odd to say it, but but I personally dread having to look at insurance. I mean, it's not a fun experience, I mean, especially in this part of the world. I mean, people are underinsured essentially, over time. So I would say plays that can do insurance properly would probably have legs, to be frank. Yeah, but that's a very regulatory heavy market as well. So you have to watch out for that one.
Nawaz, thanks so much for joining us today to walk us through the past, present, and hopefully future of fintech, particularly consumer fintech. Sounds like you're in a fascinating perch at MoneyHero. We've had a great conversation over the past of super apps and
Yeah.
present of creator economies and some of these emerging trends, absolutely wealth tech,
Yeah.
insurance. So insurance tech's been a bit of a bust so far. Let's see if it's going to be different in Southeast Asia. You never
Yeah.
know. But the whole area of wealth tech's definitely one that a lot of people are interested in. So we're only hopefully, as a population and a society, going to get richer, and we'll be looking for digital solutions to this, particularly as a younger
Yeah.
generation emerges. To the audience who've been listening and stayed to the end, if you liked what you heard or you will be watching on YouTube, like and share. That's what my CFT producers have told me to tell you. Like and share. Hope I got that right, CFT. Like and share. And thank you again to our sponsors and supporters, not least XVC.tech.